answer the question, what is scholarly publishing? Hopefully, I'll be able to share my experience of nearly 20 years in scholarly publishing to answer this key question. For anybody who's worked in scholarly publishing for any period of time, they'll be aware that there's often a lot of shared knowledge that seems to be around, that sometimes it's difficult to get a handle on. For example, I think publishers use more acronyms than perhaps any other career that's around. So hopefully today in this short video, we're going to kind of explode some of those myths around scholarly publishing and explain some of the things that are not quite easy to understand when you first join the industry. So what is scholarly publishing? Well, in very basic terms, that phrase pertains to the industry around the publication of academic books, journals, and related publications. So things like conference proceedings, for example. Really, it's anything that's published in relation to the pursuit of academic knowledge. And so more typically, we're talking about things that are published by researchers for other researchers. Now, in the first Career Hubs video, when we looked at journals specifically, we saw that a simple definition of a journal was an edited collection of academic research articles published in a periodical basis. So academic books, they also contain original academic research and they can be edited. But usually when we talk about books, we talk about monographs. Now, a monograph is simply a single a book or publication that's written on a specific subject or aspects of a specific subject. So it's not an edited collection. It's usually written by one person, or it could be two or three people, but it will have a singular focus in terms of what it's actually about. Now, when we talk about scholarly publishing, there are also other terms that essentially mean the same thing. So scholarly publishing is the same as scholarly communications, academic publishing. Sometimes the phrase STM publishing is used. Now, STM, which is science, technology, and medicine, that obviously doesn't encompass all the different subject areas available, but scientific publishing is by far the biggest area within all those subjects, and often STM is shorthand for academic publishing. So, when did scholarly publishing start? Well, you could argue that it started with Gutenberg himself and the invention of the printing press. The first books were printed in the 15th century, and as we saw in the first video, the first journals followed about 200 years later in 1665. Now, many of the first publications were Bibles, but very soon after Bibles, then academic literature soon followed. The need to share and to understand and to record academic pursuits and research became more and more important. Now, what happened with books and journals is that they simply exploded in the post-war period. Up until the war, for example, journals, there was about 1,000 or 2,000 that were published. And now there are so many published, it's hard to count, but there's probably up to 100,000 journals. So what's actually fueled that huge growth? Well, at the start, it was fueled by massive investment in the post-war period, particularly by the United States government. They wanted to invest in higher education. They wanted to increase higher education budgets. They wanted to invest in innovation and create an academic superpower. And as a result, not only did journals and books explode, but new universities started to crop up all over North America and also in Europe. Now, in that period, certain people saw a new market open up. Because there were more and more researchers and there were more and more universities, there was more and more research to be published. And crucially, there's more and more money to pay for access to that research. So people like the gentleman pictured there, Sir Robert Maxwell, saw a gap in the market, and they started to invest in academic publishers. And some of the big academic publishers that exist now saw a lot of their early growth in this post-war period. So what happened is that the evolution of a publisher from quite a kind of naive one in the kind of 17th and 18th centuries, more to somebody a bit more commercially savvy in the Victorian era, all the way to the business people that were around in the post-war period. And so that investment that was seen at a government level fueled an investment in the commercial aspects of publishing. What we also saw in the 20th century is a general shift from the start of the 20th century. There were many, many more university publishers involved in scholarly publishing, and that number receded, and the number of journals that started to be published by commercial publishers started to increase. So how big is this market that we're talking about? How big is scholarly publishing? Well, there is a very well cited report called the STM report, and the latest version of this was published in 2018. It estimated that in 2017, the market was worth about $10 billion. So this covers all English language journal publishing. And in addition to that, you've also got book publishing, conference proceedings, etc. So probably the overall scholarly publishing market was worth about $25 billion. If you think about this geographically, roughly about 40% of the global scholarly publishing revenues come from the US and about 25% from Western Europe. So what we've seen then is the scholarly publishing industry started to really grow in the post-war period, become extremely commercial in the late 20th century, early 21st century. But since then, there have been a number of major challenges that have happened that have not necessarily stopped the growth of the industry, because the industry still seems to be growing, but it certainly posed a challenge for what's been going on. We saw in the first video about open access. So there's been a big challenge to the industry in that in the pre-internet period before the 1990s, subscriptions were paid by university libraries to publishers to distribute journals. With open access, then scholarly content can be distributed almost freely. So that obviously poses a big challenge. There are also the advent of preprints. So a preprint is an academic article that hasn't been peer reviewed in a journal, but has been made available on a repository. And it's available for other people to comment, for other people to see, and it's a way of sharing new research very quickly. Again, preprints have started to be used and to subvert the traditional peer review process. So a preprint is used as evidence of a research that's been done and used in future research, rather than people waiting for the peer-reviewed article to come out. Another big thing has been predatory journals. So predatory journals are journals that don't do peer review, even though they say that they do. In fact, they say that they do a lot of things and they don't do them. They pretend to be a legitimate journal, but in fact are illegitimate and don't perform any of the publishing services that anyone would reasonably expect of a legitimate journal. They do this because they will publish the articles open access and they'll charge a fee to the authors. So they will receive the fee, but won't do anything that the authors would expect a normal publisher to do. Hence, they're defrauding those authors. And this amounts to several $1 million every year that comes out of the whole scholarly publishing industry. So what these challenges have meant is that the revenues, and the usually very big revenues and certainly relatively high profit margins that scholarly publishers have enjoyed in the late 20th century, early 21st century, have come under some significant challenge in recent years. So in summary, we've seen that scholarly publishing includes books, journals, and other content based on academic research. The industry could be as much as 500 years old, but it's only really seen major changes in the last century or so, in the post-war period. Growth in the industry has been exponential. It's grown much, much quicker throughout the latter half of the 20th century than any time before, and is now worth over $25 billion globally. Now, the industry is maintaining this growth, but there has been some increased instability around where that growth happens. And this has involved things like open access and most recently, the COVID-19 pandemic. So thank you very much for watching the second Careers Hub video, and hopefully you'll join us for our next video, which will be answering the question, what is open access? Thank you very much.